The kitchen smelled of lemon butter and roasted carrots, a scent I had hoped would wrap the evening in warmth. I had made Vera's favorite poached salmon, carefully plated beside the carrots glazed just enough to shine. A peach tart cooled on the counter, its golden crust dotted with sugar. Even the old floral linen was spread across the dining table, the one with frayed edges she used to scold me about but always secretly adored. The table was set for 6. Vera sat at the head, flanked by her bridge partner June, our cousin Lori, and 2 neighbors who had known me since I was a teenager. Glasses clinked softly as I poured the wine, my smile practiced, my hands steady despite the familiar knot in my chest. It almost felt like a family gathering, almost, until Vera lifted her glass. Her lips curved into a smirk as she swirled the wine. "To aging without baggage," she said, pausing just long enough for her gaze to lock with mine. "And to finally having a life free of dead weight. Honestly, Marin, the best gift you could give me is to leave my life." The room froze. June's cough broke the silence, Lori's fork hovered in midair. My throat tightened, but I didn't ask her to repeat it. I simply placed my napkin on the table, stood with a smile that wasn't mine, and walked to the kitchen. I rinsed my hands under cold water until they went numb, took my coat, and left without a word. That night, I didn't turn on the lights when I came home. The house was dim, shadows stretching long across the kitchen floor. I set my coat over the back of a chair and stood there for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. The peach tart still sat on the counter, untouched, its sweet scent now cloying. I sat at the table without removing my shoes, tracing the rim of my glass with a fingertip. In my mind, I replayed the moment, her voice sharp, deliberate, aimed like an arrow meant to pierce. I wondered how many birthdays she had been waiting to say it, or if it had simply slipped out, carried by years of contempt she never bothered to disguise. Memories crowded in without permission, the candles I once lined along her porch as a child, the carefully wrapped gifts I'd made with clumsy hands, the mornings I'd woken early to surprise her with breakfast in bed. All of it dissolved under the weight of that single toast. I didn't wash the dishes. I didn't touch the tart. I climbed into bed still in my clothes, the silence pressing against me, her words echoing in my ears until sleep finally took me. I was 26 when my life quietly shifted into hers. I had been in the middle of my 2nd year of graduate school when the phone rang, Vera's voice thin and trembling. She had slipped on the ice outside her porch and fractured her hip. "You're all I have," she said, her words both plea and command. I remember standing in my professor's office, the scent of chalk dust and old books hanging in the air, telling him I wouldn't finish the semester. "Just take a leave," he urged gently, but I already knew I wouldn't return. I moved back into the house that same week, believing it was temporary. Temporary stretched into years. My days became an endless rotation of doctor's appointments, pharmacy runs, and grocery trips. I took a job at the local library, close to home, flexible hours, quiet enough to make Vera feel I was never too far. I dated quietly, never seriously, sidestepping questions about marriage or children with rehearsed jokes. She began reshaping the house without asking, painting over the sunny yellow hallway I loved, replacing the kitchen tiles with cold gray squares. "It's more modern," she said, tossing out the chair I'd bought with my first paycheck, calling it tacky. I told myself it didn't matter. The walls still stood, even if they no longer looked like mine. But slowly, I realized I was adjusting to every little no she handed me, giving away pieces of myself until I could no longer see where I ended and her expectations began. Over time, agreeing became easier than resisting. Vera's opinions arrived like weather, unavoidable, unarguable. She decided which curtains belonged in the living room, what colors the walls should wear, and even which plates I set on the table. If I hesitated, her sigh was enough to tip me into compliance. The changes were small at first, the yellow hallway painted over in a sterile cream, the kitchen tiles replaced with a grid of slate gray squares that seemed to swallow the light. She called it modern, as if that word could erase the warmth I'd once felt in those rooms. Then came the furniture. The armchair I bought with my first paycheck vanished one afternoon while I was at work. She claimed it had been falling apart, though I'd sat in it the night before without so much as a wobble. In its place stood a stiff-backed chair she found at a yard sale, something she said matched the house better. Each concession felt harmless in the moment. I told myself I was choosing peace, avoiding unnecessary conflict. But in truth, I was surrendering in increments, allowing her will to overwrite mine. The rhythm became predictable, she asked, I adjusted. Over the years, those adjustments erased entire rooms of my life until I could no longer tell whether I was a daughter or a shadow. The morning after her birthday, I sat at the kitchen table with my journal open to a blank page. A mug of tea cooled beside me, untouched. My pen hovered above the paper, my hand tense, as if waiting for permission to move. The house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that presses against your skin, making you aware of every breath. Then, without thinking, I wrote it, I have been edited out of my own life. The words landed heavy, more real on the page than in my chest. I stared at them until the ink bled slightly into the fibers of the paper. For years, I'd told myself I was keeping her from feeling alone. I'd convinced myself that devotion meant erasing my needs. But seeing it written down, I understood the truth. I hadn't been caring for her, I'd been disappearing. I tore the page from the journal, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the back pocket. It felt like slipping a secret into a safe. I didn't know what would come next, only that something had shifted. The sentence was a doorway, and for the first time in years, I felt the urge to step through. I began with a list. It wasn't dramatic, just a legal pad on the dining table, my pen moving steadily across the page. At the top, I wrote what she has access to. Joint bank accounts. The house deed. Insurance policies. Passwords scribbled on the notepad by the kitchen phone. My eyes moved slowly over each item, circling the ones that needed to change first. I realized how much of my life was arranged for her convenience, how easily she could reach into places I thought were mine. The more I wrote, the clearer it became, this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger. It was about air, about being able to breathe without asking for permission. I searched online for legal referrals, avoiding any firm too glossy or large. I wanted someone precise, steady. That's how I found Tomas Reyes, a lawyer 2 towns over. His office reviews spoke of quiet competence, of boundaries restored without drama. I called the bank next, scheduling an appointment to remove her as an authorized user. My voice didn't shake when I gave my name. I told no one, not Lori, not the neighbors, and certainly not Vera. This was my work, done in the stillness of my own resolve. For the first time in years, the lines I drew on paper felt like the edges of something solid, something mine. The first changes were barely noticeable, at least, to anyone but me. I stopped reminding Vera about her appointments, letting the responsibility sit where it belonged. When I cooked, I used the small pan and made only enough for myself. The large pan stayed in the cupboard, untouched. I no longer filled the silences with polite conversation. If she left a pause, I let it hang. The house began to sound different without my constant effort to soften its edges. Vera noticed, though she didn't name it at first. She hovered in doorways, making casual remarks about my clothes or hair, her tone pitched somewhere between curiosity and control. One morning, she tapped lightly on my door, a tray in her hands, burnt toast and tea steeped until it was nearly black. "I figured you'd be tired," she said, forcing a smile. "We haven't talked much since," her voice trailed off as if she couldn't quite remember, or didn't want to, what had happened. "You mean your birthday?" I asked. She blinked, caught. "Oh, come on, Marin. It was a joke. I was tipsy. People say things." I didn't answer. I simply closed the door, the latch clicking into place like a quiet line drawn in the sand. At the bank, the manager scrolled through my account history, her brow tightening with each line. She turned the screen toward me. Someone's been transferring funds regularly to another account, she said. Small amounts, but consistent, over 6,000 in the past year. I didn't need to ask who. The pattern was too familiar, quiet withdrawals, timed between paychecks, small enough to avoid immediate notice. That evening, I found Vera folding towels in the laundry room. I saw the withdrawals, I said. She straightened, her expression carefully arranged into weary irritation. What are you talking about? My account, I said evenly. Thousands. Without asking. Vera sighed and dropped a towel into the basket. You're overreacting. It was for things we needed, repairs, prescriptions, your car maintenance. You wouldn't have minded. You never asked, I said. Her voice sharpened. You always said we're in this together. God, Marin, you're being so selfish. The word landed heavy, but not the way she intended. For years, selfish had been her weapon, a way to keep me compliant. But now, it sounded almost like a challenge. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I walked past her, up the stairs, and locked my bedroom door. Not out of fear, there was nothing to fear anymore, but because I didn't want to waste breath explaining a boundary she'd never respect. On the other side of the door, I sat on the bed and wrote the words slowly in my journal. I will not apologize for protecting what is mine. 2 mornings later, I found an envelope in the mailbox as plain, without a return address. The paper inside was thick, folded neatly into thirds. I recognized the handwriting before I opened it, neat, slightly slanted, written with care. Dear Marin, it began. I hope you don't mind the letter. I don't want to intrude, but I've watched from my window for a long time, not to be nosy, but to bear witness. I've seen what you've carried, what you've given, the way you disappear to make others more comfortable. You are not invisible, and you are not wrong. It was signed, with quiet admiration, Elaine Darnell. Mrs. Darnell lived 2 doors down. In 15 years, we'd spoken maybe a dozen times. She always waved from her porch but never lingered. I read the letter twice, then a third time, letting the words sink into places I hadn't realized were hollow. It didn't fix anything. But it steadied something inside me that had been wobbling for years. I folded the letter along its original crease and slipped it into the back pocket of my journal, right beside the torn page I'd written after the birthday. Some truths weren't meant to be shouted, they were meant to be kept close, like a talisman. By the end of that week, my decisions began to take shape in ink and signatures. I sat across from Tomas Reyes in his cedar-scented office, the walls lined with certificates and tidy shelves of leather-bound books. He was calm, deliberate, the kind of person who didn't rush to fill silence. You don't need a war, he said, sliding the first set of documents toward me. You need a boundary that holds. We started with the joint accounts, freezing them so no further withdrawals could be made without my consent. Then came the house deed, transferring sole ownership to my name. We revised my will, stripping away assumptions I'd once signed without question. Each page I signed felt like reclaiming a room in my own house, a space in my own head. My hand didn't tremble, if anything, my signature grew steadier as we went on. Outside, the afternoon wind had picked up, rattling the branches against the office window. I stepped into the street with the folder tucked under my arm, feeling lighter and more solid all at once. Back home, the air was different, maybe it was just me breathing deeper. Vera was in the kitchen, her eyes narrowing as she looked up from her crossword. Where have you been? She asked. You've been distant lately. I don't like it. I said nothing. I walked past her, upstairs, and closed my door. Behind it, I pressed my palm flat against the signed papers, their weight both a shield and a promise. The storm came, not from the sky, but through the phone. First was a voicemail from my cousin Rachel, her voice sharp with accusation. What's going on over there? Your mom says you're freezing her out. That's cruel, Marin. Then came texts from old neighbors, laced with passive-aggressive concern. Just checking in, heard some worrying things, and finally, Lori, who skipped any pretense. I can't believe you do this to her after everything she's done for you. I set the phone face down on the table, letting it buzz itself into silence. Downstairs, I heard cabinet doors slam and drawers open with more force than needed, Vera's footsteps heavy enough to carry blame up the stairs. The next morning, she banged on my door. "You've made your point," she snapped. "Now undo it." I opened the door just enough to speak. "It's not a game, Vera. There's nothing to undo." Her eyes narrowed, incredulous. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, my voice steady. "But at least this regret will be mine." 2 days later, the notice arrived, official, notarized, and irreversible. I left it on the kitchen counter where she'd be sure to see it. At dawn the following morning, I heard her dragging luggage across the hardwood floor, muttering into the phone. A car idled out front for 10 minutes. Then the door slammed, and the house fell into a silence so complete, it felt like the first deep breath after years of holding it in. When I finally came downstairs, the living room was still. A few picture frames were gone, some drawers left open, but the bones of the house remained. My house. My name on the deed, now uncontested. The quiet pressed in, but it no longer felt like accusation. It felt like breath, slow, steady, filling every corner. I started small. The painting of wildflowers I'd tucked away 5 years ago went back up above the fireplace. I changed the hallway bulbs to a warm amber light, the kind that softened shadows instead of sharpening them. I brought my grandmother's quilt down from the attic and spread it over the couch, running my hands over the blue and green stitching worn smooth by decades of use. Then I opened every window, letting air move freely through each room. The breeze carried out the faint trace of her perfume, replacing it with the scent of rain on leaves. Later, at the back of a cupboard, I found the old tea tin I used to keep in my nightstand before she called it clutter. I brewed a cup, the steam curling in the late afternoon light, and carried it to the porch. Legs tucked under me, I watched the sun slip behind the trees. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fill the moment with words. The silence was enough. A week later, I signed up for an evening art class at the community center. The room smelled faintly of pencil shavings and turpentine, the kind of scent that clung to memory. No one asked me why I was there. No one asked my last name. I slipped into a seat near the back, opened a fresh sketchbook, and waited. The instructor, a woman named Callie with silver-streaked curls and paint on her sleeves, welcomed us without ceremony. "We're not here to be good," she said. "We're here to begin." The first lines I drew were hesitant, my hand stiff from years of disuse. I hadn't picked up a pencil like this since I was 22, before grad school, before Vera's fall, before I shelved parts of myself like luxuries I couldn't afford. But by the second class, something loosened. I wasn't drawing to be seen, I was drawing because it felt like breathing again. No one here knew about the joint accounts, the slammed doors, the birthday toast that split my life into before and after. They only knew the way I shaded light, smudged with the side of my thumb, or laughed quietly when someone whispered a joke under their breath. Each week, I came home with charcoal under my nails and a stillness I didn't try to explain. I began rearranging the house one corner at a time, painting the guest bathroom a pale sage, moving the reading lamp to the other side of the couch, framing my own sketches. Slowly, the walls began to reflect me again. And with each change, I felt a little more certain I wasn't starting over. I was returning to the person I had left behind. One afternoon, the phone rang. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. "Marin," came her voice, softer than I remembered, but unmistakable. "It's me. I didn't say anything before, but I'm not well. The doctors found something, and I thought you should know." She spoke of illness, of the children asking about me, of how the house didn't feel right without me. Then, almost as an afterthought, "I'm sorry. I said things I didn't mean." I looked out the window at the daisy sketch hanging in the corner of the glass, the light shifting across it like a quiet clock. "I'm glad the kids are well," I said. "And I hope you're getting the care you need. So, can we talk? Maybe I could come by?" I closed my eyes. "I can't go back to being small so you can feel big." Her breath caught. Whether in anger or hurt, I couldn't tell. "So, that's it?" "That's it," I said. And she hung up. The next morning, I stepped into the garden with a trowel in one hand and a packet of lavender seeds in the other. The soil was warm, welcoming. I planted lavender along the porch and sage by the back fence, each handful of dirt feeling like a promise to myself. Later that day, 2 girls from down the street brought me a basket of apple cinnamon muffins. "Mom says your garden makes her feel brave," one said shyly. After they left, I lit a candle in the living room and wrote in my journal, "I thought disappearing would break me. But maybe I was meant to see myself all along." Sometimes loyalty means standing beside someone, other times, it means having the courage to walk away. Marin's journey reminds us that devotion, when given without boundaries, can slowly erase our sense of self. True loyalty is not blind obedience. It is the willingness to honor both the needs of others and the truth of our own worth. It takes bravery to face the uncomfortable truth that the people we love may also be the ones holding us back. For years, Marin sacrificed her dreams, her space, and her identity in the name of keeping peace. Yet, peace built on silence is fragile, and love built on control is no love at all. The moment she chose to reclaim her independence, she stepped into a deeper kind of courage, the courage to live in alignment with her own truth, even when it meant standing alone. This story teaches us that truth is not always loud, it can live quietly in the choices we make, in the lines we refuse to cross, and in the spaces we protect for ourselves. It's a reminder that freedom often begins not with grand gestures, but with small, resolute acts of self-respect. In the end, Marin's greatest gift to herself was not escape, but return, the return to the person she was before she learned to shrink. And perhaps the deepest truth is this: we do not owe anyone the sacrifice of our whole selves in order to be worthy of love.